Today's episode is an interview with Justin Achilli and then Rachel J Wilkinson about their project Our Brilliant Ruin, which they're doing as part of Studio Hermitage. This one isn't as directly related to Mage as most episodes, but I didn't want to pass up the opportunity to, one, talk to Justin Achilli about the RPG creative process and more or less what he thinks a modern game for adults should be like. Also, the idea of RPGs as the centerpiece of transmedia properties, which is to say projects that exist in multiple media, like a board game, TV show, and comic book series, all kind of set in the same world. I also was a little more liberal with this book in that it is free on DriveThruRPG. It is a whole-ass 298-page rulebook with lush illustrations for precisely $0. If you thumb through it and get one idea, that's worth it. I also recorded a bit at the end after I got a chance to look more at the game with some ideas for how I would use it to inform a game in the World of Darkness. My last note is that this interview was conducted at a bar, and thanks to the executive producers for giving me the budget to get the equipment that allowed me to get, I think, surprisingly good sound for recording at a bar. I do need to get pop filters for these microphones, so if you ever hear the sound cut out, that's probably where I removed a plosive to try and save your eardrums. And with that, on with the show. Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson with Mage the Podcast, reporting again live from Gen Con. And my guest today, and I'm thrilled to introduce him, is Justin Achilli of Studio Hermitage, or Hermitage. Okay,
Hermitage,
got it.
like
And
Taj Mahal.
Justin and I were speaking right before this, and I learned that your first game was Mage. How did that happen?
Yeah, my first love in the World of Darkness was, in fact, Mage. I had played games, tabletop role-playing games from when I was 9 years old. The usual story for old people like me. Played with my cousin in the basement, played D&D, and I played all through, grade school and middle school, and then kind of fell out of it. And then later on in life, I was dating a woman, and she said, "Hey, there's these games where you can play vampires and werewolves, and you could become one." Because we were both big Anne Rice fans, and I was like, "Oh, I know what those are. Those are role-playing games." So I started looking into what she was talking about. Obviously, it was the World of Darkness, and the one that spoke to me most readily was Mage because of just the ability to do whatever you were visualizing, make your own reality, and then deal with the consequences of it.
And so, but we know you largely as someone who contributed to other lines. Is there any particular reason why professionally you never interfaced with Mage? That wasn't an accusation, but it seems like you kind of became a lord of urban horror, where Mage always seemed to feel more comfortable in an urban fantasy setting that wasn't explicitly horror in the same way. The horror is certainly there, but it doesn't shove you in the face as much.
Yeah, I think a lot of that depends on what, of course, games are an interactive medium, so what the group wants to do with it, you can certainly steer it toward that. But when the time that I came on at White Wolf Publishing back in the day, I first came on to work on Rage, the collectible card game, and then gradually as positions opened up, I moved into Vampire the Dark Ages and doing the kind of supplemental games, the alternate history periods for the games, and Phil was a foundation, man, that it was just not a position that opened up. Yeah. And when Rob Rob Hatch moved over to work on Exalted, Vampire opened up, and having done Dark Ages, I was, already well grounded in what's going on there. I had worked on the Giovanni Clan book before then as well, so it was just the one that had the opportunity, so I grabbed it and ran with it.
I'm a property casualty actuary instead of a life and health actuary because a property casualty company offered me a job first. So I fully understand that. So before we talk about Studio Hermitage's current projects, if someone were to say, "Hey, Justin, we'd love your help with," you created arguably the most infamous tweet in all of Mage history when you said something to the effect of, "Just finished up my notes on what I want Mage 5th edition to be. Really excited to see where that goes." And then you decided to start your own project. Mm-hmm. So that was probably dead in the water. If someone were to say, "Hey, Justin, we'd love for you to do something, to do a bridge edition or something maybe slightly unrelated with X5, where do you think Mage should be in 2025? How would you kind of update it to modern sensibilities, if at all?"
Yeah, let's go ahead and preface this with, I don't work there anymore.
And that is the only reason I feel comfortable asking, because I'm pretty sure whatever you say is not going to happen.
The way I saw it shaping up is that a lot of Mage in the Phil Brucato era is based on the wonderment of looking out and seeing, just the vastness of what is possible. By contrast, a lot of the 5th edition World of Darkness stuff is very, very inwardly focused, very street level, very, what matters right now immediately. So, without getting too overtly into detail, I wanted to kind of turn that Mage lens around. One of the beautiful things about the World of Darkness games is your consequences always come home to roost. And that for me remains true throughout gaming, right? Like, you make choices and here's what happens. It's very prevalent in Our Brilliant Ruin, but it's the cornerstone of World of Darkness. Whether you're talking about something in Vampire like humanity and you're earning stains, whether it's something like Mage and you're dealing with the possibilities of exerting hubris and are you really willing to wreak this on the world? I wanted that to have much more immediate. Who are the neonates of Mage 5? Let's walk a mile in their shoes.
Okay. And last question: if you had to pick a tradition or a faction in Mage that you identify as, what is it?
Yeah. So this one, part of the reason Mage spoke to me so strongly in that first edition was I loved those old Josh illustrations. And so clothes, I love clothes, I love clothing. So that illustration of the Order of Hermes there in the impeccable suit, and then the way Quintessence had sort of twisted his body there, I thought that was wonderful. So I've always, even though they're not the nicest people, I sure love that Order of Hermes.
Yes, they're nothing if not effective. So I just picked up a copy of Our Brilliant Ruin, which is a gorgeous artifact. The book itself looks nice.
Awesome, thank you.
And walking through a field of people in the dealer's chamber where it's like, oh wow, how many of these did you get from Lightning Source on Tuesday? Not to say anything ill of print on demand, it does fill a niche that has been immensely useful, especially when you're like, oh wow, this is proven way more popular than we think, and it's going to take 2 months for the slow boat from China to come over with their next print run. The artifact itself is beautiful. What is Our Brilliant Ruin?
Our Brilliant Ruin is, the hook for it is Downton Abbey plus Game of Thrones at the end of the world. So the Downton Abbey side is the kind of Edwardian aesthetic, the upstairs-downstairs social dynamic, the clash between the immensely privileged and the people who do jobs and keep the world running and actually have skills and things. And then the Game of Thrones part of it is the presence of factions, right? We've got a variety of aristocratic families in conflict with one another. We've got 5 different true folk guilds and their different ideologies. Where do they overlap? Where do they come into conflict? And the third group is the unbonded, who are the outsiders. They want to tear it all down, or they've had themselves thrown out of the guild, or something bad just happened and they found themselves on the wrong side of society. And then the end of the world part is far, far, far away. There is a star that died, and its dead light has made its way to our world, the Dremark, a completely fictitious setting, right? It's not alt history, it's just kind of Edwardian looking. And that dead starlight is corroding, corrupting, eating away at the edges of the world, and turning people into monsters as well. So anytime you encounter a monster in this world, yes, it's a horrible, bad thing, but it used to be
a person,
yeah. Right? It's someone's mother, or it's your beloved pet that got dragged into, and now it's this horrible monstrous dog thing or whatever. So again, you kind of see some of the consequences of people's actions. You chose to live out here, you've tempted ruin, or you've got all this money, you're living like this, you're not actually being responsible and keeping the ruin at bay. So it's a lot of conflicts back and forth between the choices of people in privilege, people who are upholding the world, and a world that actively wants to destroy everybody.
So this is a original setting. It looks like it's taking kind of the Blades in the Dark route, where it's primarily humans and it's physics or something like it as we know it. Objects fall down and so on.
Mm-hmm, correct.
It looks like the fashion goes somewhere between late Victorian to early Edwardian to very early 1920s in terms of the style and what appeared to be light Art Deco inflection. How did the setting come to you? Did you have an idea, a nucleation site, or did the tableau of its appearance come to you first?
This has been something I've been wanting to do for over a decade. I remember being at one of the Camarilla events. Actually, no, it was one of the CCP era events in Atlanta. And I was thinking, I'd watched Downton Abbey there. I love the sense of aesthetic there. And I was wanting to do more that let people express themselves visually like that. I'm really glad that you point that out, because that's actually one of our pillars of the game. Is it's cool to look cool, right?
It is lushly illustrated.
Go ahead and cosplay at the table. We've got some of the supplements too, where we include recipes and drink recipes. So this is all about dress up in your fancy finery, go have a cocktail. You don't even need to LARP if you don't want to. Just go out there and look cool and be beautiful. And so a lot of the world revolves around that. We do have a bit of Art Deco in there. It leans a little more, you can see it on the cover, right? And it also leans pretty hard into the maximalism of Art Nouveau as well. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, we've kind of got a sliding scale of historical influence there, from the tail end of the Victorian all the way kind of up to the edge of World War II, in fact. So, again, because it's not a true historical setting, you can kind of take your influence slider and move it where you want.
What is the nature of the supernatural? Is this a world with magic? Is there a weird power source? Do people harness the power of meteors? Is it diesel punk? Kind of what is the machinations of the day-to-day life in terms of technology and setting? Or is that just not a thing you worry about?
Yeah, no, it's very focal in terms of it has a round and Edwardian, quote-unquote tech level, right? There is no magic. There is this force of the ruin we just talked about, that starlight coming to the world, and it has affected the world strangely. And so there are people who want to say, well, we can harness this, right? This is a natural force. It's unnatural to our world, but if we can tame it, if we can do something with it, it's just like electricity, or, it's just like fire, or it's just like magnets. And so the ruin does not want to be tamed like that, right? And so it has definitely made its mark on the world, turning people into monsters, literally corroding the edges of the world, eating the world away. It's particularly drawn to metal as well. So there is a sort of material scarcity in the world. We no longer have things like metal coinage. We have moved into like porcelain and ceramics for those sorts of things. There's an analog to plastic called polyresin in the world. It's kind of like Bakelite or an early plastic there. Obviously, the things that need to be metal still need to be metal. When I talk to you on a telephone in the world, that's still copper wire that's connecting us through A and B. And so every time you do that, there's a risk of, if you're using metal, here comes the ruin potentially.
And is the ruin a conscious force or a semi-conscious thing, or what kind of, you said the ruin wants or the ruin doesn't want. Is that a metaphor, or is this some kind of semi-conscious thing out there?
Yeah, that's me speaking in shorthand. The ruin itself doesn't want anything in particular. It is literally a force. It is literally a natural entity, not entity, that's the wrong word, a natural kind of, it is like magnetism. It is like nuclear power.
A lot of the artwork appears almost photographic or close to. Did that LARP experience kind of inform that aesthetic? I both know you and Rachel as having been a fan of LARPing as a medium and as a great way to express oneself in games. And you mentioned drinks and other immersive things. Is that just your sensibilities, or do you think that's a way that RPGs should be going? The D&D has picked its corner, but like, no. I'm going to give you a signature cocktail for this. We are not slaying orcs. We are doing something much more refined. Is that a direction you consciously went, or is that just kind of naturally where your creative home is?
No, it's definitely, we chose it. Like I have always loved clothes. I've always loved shoes. I remember, even going back to my youth, I remember having an issue of Details magazine with David Bowie on the cover, looking immaculate, in a very strongly lined suit. And so that sort of aesthetic here even lends itself to the kind of historical influences that we're drawing on. The art style that Ephraim Palacios leaned into as he was doing a lot of the character illustrations is heavily influenced by J.C. Leyendecker.
Oh, wonderful.
So, you go back and look at those old like Arrow collar shirts ads, era of the Saturday Evening Post. Very strong lines that he's painting with. He's showing you light and texture both in the lines and in the world there. So yeah, it is absolutely a conscious
And the
choice.
offensive part is it took him 4 seconds to do it. That's the power of an illustrator. That's why I think
he's so good at it.
I'm a big fan of Team Fortress 2, which was a video game informed by his aesthetic. J.C. Leyendecker, amazing influence. I feel like anyone who runs a game that isn't contemporary, whatever their second book is behind the storyteller manual, should be the Phaedon book on the history of fashion, just to sit next to it and be like, oh, that was a thing. So it's lovely to see a game with a distinct aesthetic to it.
Absolutely.
And kind of what location-wise, is it the same spread of terrain that we would expect in continental North America? This has a very Southern Gothic feel in a lot of cases to it, as well as mixing this kind of not quite Rust Belt feel to it, but places that are about to be abandoned but are still in use. Places past their prime, but still being done.
Yes.
It's not the abandoned Gary, Indiana, but it's a much diminished place of industry. Kind of, what is the setting like?
Yeah, you've definitely twigged onto it. That's, in fact, one of the other pillars is we call it rust and ruin. So obviously the ruin is there because it's in the title. It's eating away at everything. It's creating the scarcity. It's forcing us to think about what's important to us as we run out of time. There's a fantastic line in Rachel's audio drama. One of the characters says, I may not live long enough to have gray hair. What am I going to do with the time I have left? And so everywhere you look visually in the world reinforces that. Things are being eaten away. You're going to lose all this. And, rust is there as well to give that sense of patina, of tarnish, of, by contrast, the beautiful things that you invest effort into keeping pristine still show that. If you just let things go, they're going to disappear. They're going to be eaten away. So, you mentioned the geography a minute ago, and one of the things that we specifically have not done is arranged, the continent looks like this. In the book, you will see regional maps. You will see, here's the area of Gloaming, and here's the Crowscroft area. And for us, the intention is to allow the players to, as they tell their story, kind of remix those, place those where they want. For our story, if I have invested, say, the estate that we build together, if we build a garage and we've invested in some vehicles, then all of a sudden travel becomes important. So let's set these two areas really far apart.
Far enough apart to justify travel as being a character in the game.
Yep,
Yes.
absolutely.
The immediate thing for World of Darkness fans is this feels like a brilliant replacement for Wraith. If someone wants a wholesale replacement of it, and okay, this is what the underworld looks like. It's this dark, regal Edwardian place that is being slowly eaten away, and that is why things are forgotten. I'm always looking for ways I could just be like, yeah, this looks like a game book, but this is actually a setting book, an alternate version of what you're already doing. Give me $50. And before we get too far into it, trick question, people interested in the game, how can they get it, and what's the cost of entry?
Yeah, we are selling copies of the physical game here at the show, but I think the important part here is that if you want to just get your feet wet in the world, it will always be free. The core TTRPG will always be free. Go to DriveThruRPG, do a search for Our Brilliant Ruin. You can have the whole PDF.
Links in the show notes.
Awesome. Thanks for doing that for me.
Yeah, gladly.
So it'll always be free.
But that is a bold move because, you were in White Wolf during the days when 60% of sales were a new core book, and each book after that only had about 60% of the sales of the previous one. Why open with that? Like that, it feels like you're burning one of your best opportunities. How does this fit into a different kind of business model, or are you just that confident in the product?
Yeah, well, both. I love it. It's beautiful. We've just been talking about that. But the hook for Studio Hermitage is that we're a transmedia company. And so we have led in with the TTRPG. Don't tell anyone I said this, but this is actually a game design document that we can take into other game formats. So if we want to make a video game, there's the World Bible there, right? If we want to do a board game, it's a great game for something like, tile placement or worker placement or social deduction, right? Like who's the traitor sort of game. There's the World Bible.
Yeah, I could very much see running a parlor game where we're all dressed up like this and we're playing what is essentially a variant of Werewolf.
Yep.
Or something like that.
Who's the ruined creature among
Yes.
us? Yep.
How does one design a game with that kind of transmedia present, or we don't know where this is going to go in mind? Mage, we haven't gotten a 5th edition, probably partially because it's really hard to make a video game. I hold out hope of getting an Archmage dating sim. That's just me.
Keep your fingers crossed. Everything's on the board.
Firmly crossed. Kareem Mulmar at any moment is just going to knock down my door and be like, Robinson, you hit oil. He probably has a Swedish accent. I've never actually met the fellow. But how do you design a game with those other opportunities in mind? And do you feel as if you had to make any sacrifices to do so?
One of the things that we definitely sacrifice, and that I am happy to sacrifice in almost every case, is you don't necessarily need a huge, ponderous volume of lore. You need enough of the world to show people, look at the wonder, look at the promise, imagine the fantasy, take a tour through our world. There needs to be enough there for them to know what that is, but don't overburden yourself with it. And so one of the things that is beautiful about making games as opposed to making like traditional linear media is that you're going to put a lot of this in the player's hands. You can trust your players to make the decisions and help turn the specific expression of the world that appeals to them into their reality. And so this also gives other creative partners plenty of leeway to tell the stories that they want to do. With the comic book coming up, it uses, obviously several of the families who are in the world and characters from the various guilds and factions in the world, but it doesn't, specifically say, you must use this signature character and tell this story right here. Instead, we want everything to give promise to the player or to the creative and then let them realize that.
And what do you play in the game? Like, let's talk kind of that nuts and bolts of what are the cool things I get to do? What is my faction or my race or my whatever represent? Kind of what are the key levers when I'm making a dude, to use a technical term in our brilliant room?
A dude, definitely a dude.
The ungendered dude, yes.
Be ungendered, be whatever you feel you are in the world or wish to be. Everyone is human, and one of the things that we justify that with is these are about telling human stories, right? Human costs of things. They just give us a good baseline to understand the context, right? Everyone has a mother, or did at some point, right? And so, there's these understood relationships that you're going to test. But overall, you're going to be a member of one of 3 factions. You're going to be an aristocrat, and so the aristocrat hook is that they own everything, they have everything, all the resources are available to them. Or you could be a true folk. The true folk hook is extreme competency. They keep the world running. One of the game mechanics is you get to pick a skill, and that skill always succeeds. And so this is born of, kind of tangent here, but, when I choose to be a sailor in the game, and I have to roll the dice, and I rolled a 1, like, ha ha ha, you failed, you big dumb sailor who should be able to do this no problem. And so Our Brilliant Ruin just says, yep, you did it. That's the kind of niche you chose. You can do that. And then the third faction is the unbonded. These are the societal outsiders. This is everything from people who want to tear down this remains of feudal society, the aristocracy, to people who've been kicked out of the guilds, to the gentleman card sharp who somehow got invited to the estate for the weekend. There is tension between those three factions, right? There is that sense of upstairs, downstairs. Well, you're rich, you have money. But aristocrats don't have a very strong set of skills. Instead, they have portfolio, right? They buy off their problems, or they send their entourage to go handle it. The true folk have many more skills, as opposed to they don't have necessarily the wealth. They're just good at doing things. And the unbonded, their niche is that because they're often pushed to the edges of society, they are more resilient to the ruin itself. They can abate ruin affliction.
And it seems like each of those has their own distinctive visual style and visual language associated with it.
Yes.
That going through, Art Nouveau seemed to come through more with the True Folk, and the Unbonded had almost this suprematis revolutionary 1920s through 1950s Russian art style with the bold red colors.
And a lot of them wear hats because these are things that they have plucked off old battlefields, or as we were plundering this neglected, abandoned estate that we found. Ooh, this is cool. I'm going to keep it, right?
And what does one do? Are there cool powers, or is it like, I will use money?
Yeah, in fact, that's part of the way we like to think of portfolio, those set of character abilities. Portfolio is almost like quote-unquote spells. If I want to, I can throw money at a problem, and I tick off 1 money, and then that's solved for the scene, right? And other portfolio examples include things like access, right? I'm on the guest list, or entourage. I've got people who can come help me. Tools and equipment, so I happen to have just the right thing that we need for this, and that these don't have to just be in the aristocrat category. Anybody can have portfolios, it's just the aristocrats have more
likely
right?
of it. Yeah. And this to me solves one of the fundamental problems that we had in old World of Darkness games, where you have resources 5. What the hell does that mean? Because you can easily have a game where rich son of a bitch solves every problem. But if you have it like, no, this means you have 5 money to spend. You can use 1 to get out of a jam, 2 to deal with law enforcement, 3 to deal with a political problem, and then you have modifiers that kind of go from there.
And then no matter what you use, like, the ruin doesn't care how much money you have.
Yes.
The ruin is going to come get you eventually anyway. And, you can have a bunch, you can spend to keep yourself away from where the ruin is, but at the end of it all, the ruin wins out, right? As you page through the book, you'll see that it starts with, very bright arrangements. The colors are bright, and as you go toward the end of the book, it gets very saturated, very dark, and the last page is a conclusion of these are 2 of literally the last lovers in the world finally getting to be together, even though the ruin wins out.
What is the nature of the ongoing ruin? So you mentioned the apocalypse. It seems like you're sealing the deal. This is not something the world survives. This is
Correct.
Not a strange new world.
Correct.
The old one will simply be gone.
You living through the apocalypse, and as everything is coming apart, as it all goes to shit, what do you consider important? What is worth devoting your time to as the place you live disintegrates?
Are there mechanics for that? Do we have phases of ruin, where it is dark society and then collapsing society and then collapsed society?
Not so much as it's driven by the narrative structures. Where it becomes immediately obvious is there's an entire chapter 5, it's devoted to the estates. And so the estate doesn't have to be, Downton Abbey, it doesn't have to be a rich person's house. It might be your True Folk guild house, or your academic institute, or your unbonded homestead out in the whatever. And you can build out your estate. There's some rules for adding on particular features, and it generates resources for you, or it's a place where you can recover from injury, restore yourself. And the more you use the features of the estate, the more ruin accumulates in the estate. So the more you make yourself comfortable, or the more you do the thing, the more you are literally bringing ruin to your doorstep. And so, how much risk are you willing to take on? Very much like the World of Darkness, it thrives with proactive players, right? I want to do this, as opposed to, there's a monster over there, you must go kill him. Absolutely, there are monsters and you should go kill them. What you consider important, can you let the vampire do their thing for a little while you put your thumb in the eye of that horrible, horrible rival you have in society?
Was it important to you that the world end?
Absolutely, the world must end, because that's what creates the stakes. We're not going to do a story where, here is the story of the world falling apart, right? You can do that if you want, but the way this is set up and its kind of sliding time scale is you can set it early on in the ruin, as the blights themselves are happening. Why are the crops gone bad? Or you can literally do, this is the party of the last night that the world exists, and there is no tomorrow. Most people will probably tell their stories in the middle, because that's where you can set up, your objectives, your long-term goals. There's a system called schemes, whereby you do stuff sort of off camera. So long as it affects another person, you can kind of set up a scheme to happen, kind of during downtime. But yes, absolutely, the world ends. That's important because it creates the stakes.
And I guess the last thing is, you've been in the game development business for, I'm going to say, a while.
I appreciate you obscuring my age there.
I mean, we just talked about your exposure to Mage 1E. How is this book a product of this Justin Achilli? What do you feel is the wisdom that you brought to it, the understanding of games that you brought to it that maybe you couldn't have done 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago? Or alternatively, how do you feel that this game is appropriate to 2024?
Yeah, one of the things that I particularly like about it, and a lot of this is my tastes, but you need to trust your designer. The thing the designer loves will come through in their work. We were just talking, you can feel my enthusiasm for it, right? I love to play games like this, and it reflects my current taste, but also, I think the current state of the world, in that it doesn't require a huge amount of time to create a character. Under 30 minutes for your first character, and once you know the systems, you'll do it in 5 minutes or less. The systems themselves are very, very light. They're very, very narrative driven. They assume that you and a group of friends want to get together and tell a story, so it leans much more on the narrative side than it does on a simulation side, or a hugely a dense set of rules where you're trying to. There's nothing wrong with a dense set of rules, but for us telling these stories of love and betrayal, the stories themselves come to the fore, and really the systems are there to help facilitate those, right? Roll your dice, see what the outcome is, boom, we got it, and then we fill in the details.
Is this the kind of game where everyone is a little bit a storyteller?
Yes. The game master rolls no dice in our Brilliant Ruin. There's these kind of static benchmarks that are set up that you test against as a player. And as a player, you choose how you want to approach the situation. It's not something where, I've got strength and I've got, fight, so I'm rolling my strength plus my fight. Instead, we care more about your motivation, we care more about your mindset, we care more about your emotional state, your personality. So the player then chooses, I am particularly cunning, and so I am going to cunning plus fight as my dice pool. And so the way I describe that then is, I'm real squirrely and I get behind you and I backstab you, as opposed to, a player who might set themselves up as loyalty plus fight. I'm going to defend you to the death. I stand in front of, the creature as it's trying to hurt you, and so I roll my dice pool that way. So there is no, combat equals this dice pool or this trait plus this trait. Instead, it's how the player chooses to face the issue.
And the thing to me is, I think all games have a hidden lesson in what they do. So I'm a big fan of the Monty Cook game Invisible Sun, and people say that's wish fulfillment because you're a wizard. I say it's wish fulfillment because every character is independently wealthy and doesn't need a job. In the same way that the World of Darkness is, it's a world where bad things don't happen to children, animals are fine, and no one dead names you. This doesn't seem worse in any way. If we need to feed someone to a vampire periodically, that's fine. And the contrivance to me that I love is, our group was only able to meet 6 times and we never got to finish everything. I guess the ruin took us. We now retroactively have the ability to feel like, oh no, that was planned the whole time. Right. So as an adult with a stepkid who's bad at time management, I appreciate you giving me that get out of jail free card when invariably we were very enthusiastic for the first 3 sessions and then life simply chooses to intrude.
Well, another game I really enjoy is Morkborg or Morkborg. And so there the rules are built into the game. The world is going to end. You can choose to, is it something that's going to happen in the future? We'll roll a D100. Is it something that's imminent? We roll a D2. And so that sense of the world is going to end is definitely built in here. It doesn't use the same system, but yes, if you don't finish the story, you ran out of time, right? The ruin took over. There's nothing left of the Dramark. And as much as you loved that other person, you never got around to telling them. And so that's a great bit of tragedy to indulge right there.
Yeah, it's weird that the end of the game would have to invoke the X card, but I could certainly see that happening. So if we're interested in this product, what should we do? how should we keep track of what Studio Hermitage is doing?
Yeah, come check us out at ourbrilliantruin.com, which is specifically focused on this game. That'll point you at the a place where you can download the game itself. We'll have the online store up soon. You can't see it, but I'm crossing my fingers. And we'll be available at other web storefronts. If you're interested in what Studio Hermitage is doing overall, studiohermitage.com with a hyphen in there like the old white-wolf.com. And so that doesn't tell you a huge amount of what we're doing, but you can see kind of where we're headed overall as a company. And we just share more and more detail as the projects achieve a shareable state.
And as we mentioned, the absolutely gorgeous rulebook costs $0. If you don't like it, I will be glad to pay for your copy. And nothing you've ever written has been poorly considered. Nothing Rachel has ever done has been ugly. So between the two, I look forward to seeing how the product works. Justin, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. And before we go, I do want to step in. We did have a third writer working on the project, Pam Ponsalon. She worked with us in a freelance capacity. You'll probably remember her name from the Radiant Citadel supplement for D&D. And so one of the ideas of lost history in the world is her idea there. And so, that again helps us realize not only are we heading toward inevitability, but we, in fact, have lost some touch with where we come from. And so, that again helps make everything a little more trenchant, a little more poignant, a little more bittersweet. And I absolutely want to acknowledge her contribution to it.
Awesome.
So,
thank you so much.
you bet. Thank you.
Joining me for the second half of our discussion on Our Brilliant Ruin is Rachel Wilkinson. I feel like I messed up something about your last name.
No, it's Rachel J Wilkinson, but that is only because there is a woman that is named Rachel Wilkinson that is like an English author, and so it is Rachel Wilkinson.
Okay,
but
at least I got that.
Yes, but I added the J because I was like, I'm fancy.
Yeah. So we just got to talk to Justin Achilli about setting development design, this reflecting time. Didn't know that his first World of Darkness game was Mage.
Surprise.
That was wild to me. It's like maybe he has a secret love for wizards that I just didn't know. What part of this tome do you feel is most responsible for, or was this entirely everything a group work?
It was actually pretty collaborative. I would say if I put my stamp on anything, I put my stamp on the True Folk. So we came into it, and Justin knew that he wanted to have aristocrats, and he kind of had an idea of the families he wanted. I think he might have had maybe 3 or 4 families. I know I ended up making the Dara in here, but when it came to the True Folk and the Unbonded, it was those were sort of blank slates, and so I came in and I wanted to have a True Folk. I wanted to have the 5 families be mirrored by the 5 True Folk guilds in some way, and so that was really, I came in and made those, I would say, for sure.
And what is the nature of the factions within the game? So we talked about the aristocrats, we talked about the True Folk, we talked about the Unbounded. What are the subgroups within that, and kind of what do they represent, if there are any?
So the aristocrat has different families, and you have to understand that all of these aristocrats, they're fake aristocrats. They're up-jumped wealthy people. All this whole sovereign era.
They're not peers. They're gentry.
The sovereign era is behind us. The royal era is behind us. And so the idea is that these people just chose titles.
Okay.
They just said, I'm going to be a baron now.
Okay.
And fight me, or.
And I have the money to convince everyone I can throw the party lavish enough that everyone in the upper crust will call me Duke.
Yes. And so it is an expression of audacity in a way to say, I'm just going to take this title for myself. And it also establishes authority. It makes them separate, makes it seem as though they have power when they actually have none. I mean, chivalry is our sort of justice system, because there is no law and there are no courts, and there is not someone that you can go to adjudicate your problems by the law or anything like that. Chivalry is sort of a mob rule. It's like, if you upset us enough, the population will rise and drag you out of your bed. And so it's playing that game of how much control do I have over my fate, how much rule do I have, how much authority do I have before they come and with their pitchforks and torches. And
you made mention to mob rule. Why not have a constabulary or a corrupt political order? Is that your commentary on anything contemporary, or is that just a setting contrivance that you wanted to see you can never go to the police?
Well, it was because, can I be honest?
Shoot.
It's because of my LARP background.
Okay.
I don't want to have to go to the storyteller. And that is sort of the in-world version of that. Like, if I'm having a conflict, or I have to adjudicate a conflict, I want that to be me and the other player. I want us to figure that out. Whether, in-character drama, whether, even if I'm throwing chops at somebody, that's okay. But I don't want somebody else to decide who was right and who was wrong. I want us to be able to have that drama. I want us to be able to have that experience. And so we also want to show this idea of lost history, of lost civilization. I'm making finger quotes.
Give us a little more about lost history. What does that mean? Is that a term of art within the game, or?
Yeah. So the idea is that you have this sovereign era. The sovereign era was what you would consider a typical sovereign with nobility and aristocratic peerage and these sorts of things. And it was that this ruin started. And in the earliest days of the ruin was coming in, and it clings to metal. And this is also one of the things that I had a hand in that I'm really pretty proud of, is that the idea is that you would use these metal tools to till the fields and plow your crops, and therefore you were blighting your own crops. And so as the ruin kind of came, then you were eating that food, and then you were blighting your own bodies. And so this idea that this dead starlight comes down and is sort of afflicting the fields, and it is called the blights, and this is a destabilization that is sort of happening, and the royals decide, oh, I'm just going to hide from this. I'm not going to confront this.
Mask of the Red Death, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to stay in my little estate and do my thing, and what happens is they end up having to kind of flee their homes, because as the ruin encroaches, so the cool thing I think about the ruin is that it's actually light. So we get past this light-dark trope. The darkness actually saves you. Lightness actually kills you, in the sense that this is why it's this mountain region. So if you think of living in the shadow of a mountain was actually protecting you. Living in the dark valleys of a mountain is actually protecting you, physically from this thing. And so the estates that were crumbling, these royals were sort of fleeing to whatever they could get to. And that's the idea, is that as this is kind of falling apart, as the world is corroding around them, as they are dying, so is this history. And so that lost history aspect is to talk about the time that came before, and those rules no longer apply. And this is also how we got into being able to talk about it's always now. I don't know if Justin talked about in that. Yeah, so in our game, it's always now. Whatever you're doing, it's always now. So there's not this canon that you have to necessarily follow. There's not necessarily this thing happened to a character and that will always be the thing that happens. So you're able to kind of dig into this. I don't want to call it chaos. It's not chaos. It's a society that is functioning and working, but there are gaps in it. There's ways to take advantage of it. There's a way to have agency in it. And I just feel like when you have these authorities, these top-down authorities, when you have these established religions, established laws and governments, now you're in a box. But if all of that is gone, you are choosing what you do at the end of the world. You choose the person that you want to be. Nobody's going to come and arrest you for being bad. So is that who you want to be as you go into your long good night? Like, it gives you a lot of opportunity for character, I think.
Ken Hite frequently says the best time to set an adventure game is always in an era where an empire is dying.
Well, yes.
There is greatness to be plundered, there is order to be subverted, but there is also something new and beautiful that can be created if one chooses to go in that direction. And it's kind of interesting looking at you and Justin having both sizable LARP backgrounds or familiarity with the nature of it, and how that sensibility was informed, because I feel are LARP informed, but in the sense that they get rid of a lot of the fun mechanical stuff and kind of replace it with this dull, mealy-mouthed mediocrity, where you have looked at LARP and said, no, how do we get the players to resolve everything? How do we get it so the storyteller doesn't need to touch the dice? Which is a sensibility a lot of games have taken, where at most a storyteller sets a static difficulty to do something.
Right. The GM can have that kind of control, but it was also to make something accessible, because I also think time is valuable. People's time is valuable, and I think the idea to be able to, I wanted to be able to build a character and roll up a session 0 in less than 30 minutes, and that is exactly what happens. You can do a character in 20 minutes maybe, and you could be playing a game. And that is even with the GM having some story beats planned out, but it is a very fast game to set up, and it's also a very fast game to play, and then you can play it as long as you want.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say that in role-playing games, the finite resource is the storyteller. If we can mint more GMs, they're vanity player tools, but when I look through the dealer hall, things aimed at saying, GM, I'm going to make your job easier, are the ones that have a dozen booths, as opposed to just one figure prints thing where it's like, no, I will help you make a epic goblin paladin figurine or something for you. What contrivances do you have in this to make it easier for the person running it, do you feel?
Well, just that. Character creation. is less than 30 minutes. There is not a giant system. It's a point spend system, so that does feel very World of Darkness. It is the idea that it is your personality and your skills and your portfolio. You would get 10 points in your personality. Skills, it depends on the faction you pick, and portfolio, it depends on what the faction you pick. But then you drop your points in there, and that's your character, and that's it. And you have what we call an epigram, which is thing like the thing that you learn from that person. All the vampire players are screaming at me right now. Sorry, y'all.
Both the vampire players in my audience, yes. They're going to be fine. We can like, drown them out.
It's connections. But it is that same kind of concept, that same kind of idea that you have this phrase, you have this quote, you have this motto that you're living by, and that's your entire concept. And so the GM is able to lead the players into something that is very quick for them to be able to grasp it. They don't have to make a bunch of relationship maps. They don't have to spend an hour choosing each skill. If I never see a merit and flaws list again, it will be too soon. And I know the crowd I'm saying that to, but when you're sitting there having to say, I'm going to pick each one of these things, I'm going to decide, or having to take so many merits to have to equate to so many flaws, it's just so fiddly. Like, no, just let me play the character I want to play. I will let my character fuck up their own life, like how they want to fuck it up. And
the thing I have always liked about Mage, though, is the draw of merits and flaws has always been lower, just because traditions are political factions. You can make your wizard however the heck you want. Your force is 3 and my force is 3 can be completely different in a way that your dominate 3 and my dominate 3 are always going to have the same powers to it. So the need to have merits and flaws to make your character extra special has never really been there. So amen to that commentary.
Yes, there's not equipment lists.
Yeah.
There isn't. This is not a tactical game. This is not about how you do something. This is about
You
why.
don't want to have skirmish miniatures for this?
No, there is going to be no hex map for it.
You would have to agree, though, that they would be the sexiest skirmishing miniatures.
Yes.
Give me my Art Deco tank that I could just roll across the field of ruin. I'm just saying, yeah.
It'd be hot.
Yeah.
I know it'd be hot, but yes, no, this is absolutely narrative. This is supposed to be narrative. This is supposed to be a collaborative storytelling experience. It's supposed to be about what can we do as a group? How do we bring Downton Abbey into the table with us? And really, how do we tell our own television show, for sure?
It is on the setting to bring the theatric. It is on the players to bring the dramatic.
Most of the time, I know I'm dealing with adults who know how to be messy bitches. Dials, and that's a weird answer, I know, but it's the ability to turn up things and the ability to turn down things. So if you have a table that loves horror, then you can turn up the dial on ruin. You can turn up the dial on monsters. You can have, this is a very lethal game. That if you are a character running into one of our ruined creatures, you better have a group with you because you're going to have a TPK. Okay. Like dangerous in that sort of way. So if you have a group of players who really like action or really like really tense physical scenes, we can do that. We can do that in a narrative way. But if we also just want to play soap opera, if we just want to have, if we want to play Bridgerton in the apocalypse, you can do that. And so one of the things that this book is doing, if you want to say as a tool, is the idea that you can scale this however you need to scale it.
I haven't figured out the connection yet, having only just been exposed to the property, but it does, in this weird little way, have what if Call of Cthulhu came out in 2024 with a different sense of sensibilities and similar styles and aesthetics. Like right. it very much feels like Wicked Berlin in here, but it feels as if, even if not directly, that the direction my head goes when trying to explain characters in that world are kind of drawn in a similar direction. That was a poorly formed thought, and I'm going to actually have to read the book. But Rachel, if we're interested in seeing what happens next for this or this project, how should we follow along with your adventures and misadventures?
Well, I'm going to give you 3 places to look. There's Studio Hermitage, which is talking about all of the projects.
Studio-hermitage.com?
Yes. And then there's ourbrilliantruin.com, which is specifically about this. And then there's RachelJWilkinson.com, which also follows me because you love me.
All of which I imagine have great graphic design to them. Yeah. So, Rachel, thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you so much.
So having had a little more time to look at the book, some things that kind of jumped out at me are, I like the idea that all monsters were once human. I think Mage could use this in the form of the most common example being paradox spirits, being mages who've died due to paradox explosions or what have you, or alternatively as a result of a backlash. Many other types of spirits may once have been human too, ranging from high umbral lords who've disembodied to certain demons. And I think this creates an interesting contrast in that you can use it to either show a human core to just about anything or to indicate how far human nature can be kind of bent. I like the idea of paradox on magical items at like wonders and magical workings, kind of functioning like ruin. This would bring wonders much closer to depletion, which is a mechanic used in cipher system games, instead of accumulating paradox, or in exchange for you being able to more easily make wonders. Whenever you use the item, you roll some number of dice. If two of them show up ones, your item has been ruined. And either that was its last use, or maybe it only has one more. You adjust the probability by increasing the dice in the roll or reducing them as appropriate, and the number of ones or number of dice may vary by locations. The sample one I came up with was you roll one die in your sanctum, thus it's impossible to get 2 ones. 2 dice in a reality zone that really aligns with what you're doing, giving you a 1% chance of failure. 3 dice in something that is neutral towards what you're doing, 4 in an opposing one, and 5 if you're opposing it with witnesses. This gives about a 5% chance of it breaking in an opposed reality zone, or 1 if it's very friendly to you. I like the idea of backgrounds being something that is also depleted, that gives you temporary bonuses that get applied to dice pools until you have an opportunity to refresh it. Your character has 4 dots in resources, and for each dot you use, you can tick one off to gain 2 additional dice. If you blow 2 points at once, maybe you get 5 additional dice. You can either have this increase linearly or superlinear or sublinearly, and that would kind of indicate power of money. And you restore this by spending time managing your estate, looking over your investments, visiting your factory, spending time in your shop, something to kind of refill that pool. The nature of assembling an estate, which is kind of like your lair, and piecing it together is fun in that you kind of figure out what each person brings to the table in terms of you may have a true folk engineer who brings a garage. You may have an aristocrat gardener or salon or hosting space. The key here is you figure out the mechanical benefit from a list. And that's kind of how the balancing occurs, saying, hey, these things are roughly the same. Obviously, balance is kind of an illusion depending on what a game focuses on, but still. And then you have the opportunity to reskill it. If you want 2 dice added to attempts to repair things, that could be a workshop. It could also be the spare room where visiting technicians are allowed to work. It could be your library that has all of your reference manuals. There's a bunch of ways to get to the same place thematically, and that lets you reskin it to be appropriate to what you're doing. I cannot emphasize enough how good the art in this book is, especially for someone who's a fan of Western art history. It is just lush with Art Deco blimps or modernist cars or Art Nouveau mansions. And to me, this is amazing fodder for Umbral Realms. This may be what your realms created sometime between the end of the Victorian Empire and World War II look like. Someone escapes, and this is what the Great Hall of Science in Paris looks like for the Etherites, at least in some ways. This also helps portray maybe the slow effects of entropy on someone who has a realm with 5 dots of resonance or something, or 4 dots of joy or morbidity, as things around them just kind of slowly decay. And this gives you artistic cues to describe what that looks like. Ruined creatures can serve as demon servitors, progenitor mishaps, bane spirit examples, or the results of a very, very bad paradox backlash. I like the idea that Lord, Lady, Duke, Duchess, and such are just kind of self-acclaimed titles, and they work because people agree to them and don't challenge you. A mage becomes an archmaster not when they get the 6th dot, but when they get called archmaster by other archmasters, or they call themselves that, and no one corrects them. It is something that requires, if you want to, metaphysically, a little bit of self-deification. And it isn't much different from what kind of happens in the game, but it kind of really points out that rank and status are contrivances. It also suggests that you could mount a campaign to rob someone of archmastery by convincing enough people that they're they're full of shit. I also think this is a good framing for a game where magic dies. It gives you some tools to portray that apocalypse with that sliding scale, the idea that slowly magical history could be lost. This is one that is kind of the slow death of magic, and mortal life kind of continues, but you could see this kind of befalling the Umbra and the ruin spreading across, going through, say, the Spirit Wilds or the Vulgate or something like that. They were just some of the ideas I had. This has been Mades the Podcast, where we'd love to have you as part of our estate for the apocalypse. This show has been brought to you by its executive producers, and you can join them at patreon.com/madesthepodcast. First, we have the oracles of the following factions in Our Brilliant Ruin. Ben Bendelow, Oracle of the Astus Willow family, who is trying to tame the ruin. Buck Gregory, Oracle of House Belafine, who thinks that the ruin is a crucible for humanity to endure. Christopher Phillips, Oracle of House Dara, who thinks nothing is made to last and we should enjoy ourselves. Guy Stewart, Oracle of House Glade Park, who is whistling past the graveyard. Jay Widener, Oracle of House Valgrieve, ancient and conservative. Mikhail, Oracle of the Curators of Crown Hall College. Pukaji, Oracle of the Chatterlanes of the League of Glove and Key. Sean Gallagher, Oracle of the Esthetes of the Peacock Feast. The Crevaribus, Oracle of the Investigators of the Piedmont Accord. St. UX Player, Oracle of the Technical Experts of the Rivet and Bellow Union. Jason Vines, Oracle of the Revolutionaries, Vagabonds, and Survivors of the Unbonded. Derek Semsek, Oracle of the strange schilokinetic creatures that blend computers and steampunk, and Drawncap, Oracle of the Ruined, who were once human and now seem to be having just like a really bad day, along with Archmaster Andrew Edelstein, Archmaster Brad the Blue, Archmaster Dan Svensson, Archmaster Leroy Bryce, Archmaster Morgan Aran, Archmaster Nathan Weaver, Alex, Alexia, Ambiversion, Andrews S., Anon, Badurfi, Berto, Blaze Hibbard, Blake Ryan, Brandon, Bryce Perry, Bubba the Pale One, Chris Blake, Sin Shodas, Sig, Daniel Cuppen, Daniel Scribner, Darren Hennessy, David McFall, David Roy, Dennis Osborne, Eli Levenger, Eric Schwenk, Fragerock, George Lara, Gray Trillig H, Henry Kraft, Ia Bolt, Jason Duncan, Jason Kennedy, Jason W. Briggs, Jay Gatsby, Jeff Bryn, Jenna F., Jervis Johnson, John Magnuson, Jolyn Andes, Josh Heath, Josh Hillrup, Laws and Stuff, Kathleen Halperin, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Chris Kinner, Leslie Weatherstone, Manel Canos, Matthew Prohl, Maurice Hopkins, Michael Creedle, Michael Parker, Nabero, Neil Patterson, Nikita Klamenov, Pax Cow, Patrick McNamara, Patrick Mulder, Rachel Grace, Ricardo, Richard Bat Brewster, Robart the Robot, Ryan Stray, Rob H., Ryan Kendi, Samuel Tobin, Sev Nessus, Starfish, Stephen Carton, Steve Wynyard, That's Real Nito, Thrice Great, Tyler Bryan, Vincent Hamilton, Walter, William Connolly, William Martin, and Wolf Larryson. Our EP shoutout is to That's Real Nito, who makes me think of Nido, the genus of Australian aranomorphs, which is to say true spiders and part of the Trachosominae family, which is spiders with lateral spinnerets. There are some 6 species of Nido spiders, and they were described by arachnocologist Norman L. Platnick in 2002. Norman was considered the best arachnocologist and spider taxonomist of his generation, and his name is found in 8 genera and over 50 species. At the time of his death in 2020, he was undertaking a review of all 1,500 known and 2,500 estimated species of goblin spider. When I think of spider cladistics, I'll think of you, Nido. Rather listen on YouTube, search Mades the Podcast on YouTube to find our full library there. If you super like this episode or super didn't, drop us a line at madesthepodcast@gmail.com or at madesthepodcast on Twitter. We have a hop and Discord community at discord.me/madesthepodcast. If you like us, please give us a review on the platform of your choosing and tell a friend about us. Also go to madesthepodcast.com for show notes and all of our previous shows. Now go change reality. Bye.